Good evening, welcome, and thank you for joining us online for the Werklund School of Education's annual Distinguished Research Lecture with Dr. Tonya Callaghan. We are grateful to the University of Calgary's Alumni Association for their sponsorship. My name is Dr. Ghada Al-Atrash. I also happen to hold my PhD from the Werklund School of Education and Educational Research. This school and its faculty have contributed a great deal to my knowledge and my understanding in the field of education, and for this, I am always grateful. Our distinguished research lecturer this evening is Dr. Tonya Callaghan. I have had the honor and the privilege of working with Tonya as a research assistant during my years of doctoral work, and I have learned from her a great deal. Dr. Callaghan exemplifies how to teach anti-oppression education, and I have witnessed how her pedagogical approach has touched the minds and the hearts of our students, and in such powerful ways. Today, I continue to draw from her teachings and her research, and I also teach topics of anti-oppression, anti-racism, women's and gender studies, and social justice to my students at Mount Royal University. As importantly, Dr. Callaghan has embodied to me the deepest meaning of courage, of resistance, of resilience. And she has modeled what it means to be a social justice activist for the marginalized and oppressed in our communities. She is a scholar and is importantly a human for whom I hold great respect and admiration. And I am honored to know you, Tonya, and congratulations. As we begin today, I would first like to acknowledge the land on which we stand. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nation, Kainai First Nation, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. As for the order of events this evening, we will first begin with the remarks of our Dean of the Werklund School of Education, Dr. Diane Gerlich. Next, Dr. Sylvie Roy, Chair of Languages and Diversity at the Werklund School of Education, will introduce our distinguished research lecturer this evening. Then Dr. Tonya Callaghan, our guest speaker, will present her lecture, which will be followed by a Q&A that I will be moderating. Please feel free to send your questions in the Q&A chat box that will be available to you here. And so, without further ado, we will begin. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Dean of the Werklund School of Education, Dr. Diane Gerlich. Dr. Gerlich holds her PhD in Educational Policy and Foundations from the Institute of Education, University of London. Her master's degree is in Educational Policy from the University of Calgary. Dr. Gerlich has provided service and leadership to the Werklund School of Education and the University of Calgary since her arrival in 2011. She was the chair of the Educational Leadership Specialization before being appointed as Associate Dean of Undergraduate Programs in Education. She also served as a member of the Executive Cabinet for the University of Calgary United Way campaign. At the provincial level, she was a member of the Teacher Education Certification Committee. She also served with the Canadian Philosophy of Education Society, Philosophy of Education Society in the United States, as well as the Philosophy of Education Society of Great Britain. In the broader community, she served as a mentor with the CRIEC Bow Valley College Mentoring Collaborative, Center for Excellence in Immigrant and Intercultural Advancement, and for the Calgary Immigrant Services for Professional Immigrant Women. Welcome, Dr. Gerlich. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for such a powerful opening, Ghada. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending tonight's event. One of the key academic priorities of the Werklund School of Education is our collective commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, with the overarching goal of bettering humanity. The annual Distinguished Research Lecture celebrates the outstanding scholarly achievements of one of our Werklund scholars who exemplify these values and ideals. In this light, it is my pleasure to open the event tonight to introduce Dr. Tonya Callaghan, an international scholar whose work has been committed to supporting LGBTQ students in schools, and particularly those who attend faith-based schools. There has been heightened public discourse about how to create safe and inclusive schools, particularly with LGBTQ students. It is at the core of who these students are, and having a school community that is supportive of their identity, either through their peers, teachers, or in the formal curriculum, is critical to their own well-being and safety. This is so incredibly prevalent where a particular faith may not condone or support LGBTQ youth. Tonya's work attends to how to reconcile these tensions and for how faith schools can create allies for LGBTQ youth that embraces their sexual identity rather than silences or further marginalizes them. Tonya's work has ramifications not only for faith-based schools, but for immigrants and refugees who may be escaping from their former homelands due to gross injustices towards LGBTQ individuals who face systemic discrimination, prejudice, or persecution. I truly look forward to Tonya's talk tonight, given that her work has made such a meaningful and important impact in the very lives of so many children, youth, and adults. I will now invite Dr. Sylvie Waugh, Associate Dean Research, to formally introduce Dr. Tonya Callaghan.
Thank you, and good evening. As the Associate Dean Research in Werklund School of Education, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Callaghan, recipient of the Distinguished Research Lecture Award. This award is a prestigious acknowledgement given annually by the Werklund School of Education to one of its scholars. The award recognizes a scholar who has made outstanding contributions to research and community by advancing and leading educational research. So Dr. Callaghan is an associate professor in Werklund School of Education. She taught secondary English for over 10 years in Canadian and international schools, in rural and urban settings, and in Catholic and non-Catholic systems. Dr. Callaghan's doctoral thesis, Holy Homophobia, Doctrinal Disciplining of Non-Heterosexual in Canadian Catholic Schools, was recognized with the following awards: the American Educational Research Queer Studies Dissertation of the Year Award, the Governor General's Academic Gold Medal, and the Canadian Association for the Study of Women in Education Doctoral Award for Outstanding Dissertation. She also published a book called Homophobia in the Hallways, Heterosexism and Transphobia in Canadian Catholic Schools, which was published in 2018 with the University of Toronto Press. Dr. Callaghan is also recipient of 2 University of Calgary Teaching Awards for curriculum development and was invited to join the Teaching Academy with the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Callaghan, who will now present Out of the Closet, Heterosexism and Transphobia in Our Schools and Globally.
Well, thank you so much, Diane, Sylvie, and Ghada, for those wonderful introductory remarks. It's very kind of you. While I'm thanking people, I would like to thank all of you here in cyberspace for coming. I would also like to thank Jamie Anderson, an emerging scholar in trans issues and education, for making this PowerPoint. This is especially apropos given that we are currently in Transgender Visibility Week. Thank you, Jamie. I'd also like to thank Mark, a gay man in Montreal, who gave me permission to use some of his artwork from his blog, Slap Upside the Head, for some of the slides. Of course, huge thanks are due to my partner, Suzette Meyer, without whom my scholarly work would not be possible. Thanks, Suzette. Thank you. I would like to take a few moments to provide a brief overview of tonight's talk. I understand that some youth from Alberta Gay Straight Alliance Network might be in attendance tonight, so I want to focus on some of the findings from my studies of young people who attended Catholic schools, particularly in terms of how they are leading the revolution against religiously inspired homophobic and transphobic oppression. I am doing this as a way to counterbalance some of the more difficult content of this lecture that has to do with oppression, self-harm, and suicide. Then I'll turn my attention to my current international comparative study already underway. Finally, I'll end by touching upon a collaboration with Calgary's Center for Newcomers, together with my colleague Ghada Elatrash, in which we turn our attention to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex, abbreviated to LGBTI, refugees, in an already vulnerable group facing increased risks related to mental health, poverty, and homelessness. At the end, there will be ample time for a question and answer period. Before I begin, though, I would like to acknowledge that the intersections between religion and sexuality are not without controversy, given that they are both considered to be highly private matters, yet both are complexly related to social life. My research is not about condemning the Catholic faith. It's about pointing out that there are small pockets of human rights violations occurring against gender and sexual minority groups in some Canadian Catholic schools. Since this is a research talk, you might be wondering what kind of research this is, after all. I employ a number of qualitative research methodologies, but the one I'm going to be focusing on tonight is narrative inquiry, which is the study of experience understood narratively. Narrative inquirers like me study experience, and then they think narratively about those experiences throughout the inquiry. Basically, this means I tell stories. Stories founded in fact, also known as true stories. I'm going to be telling a number of true stories tonight. Let's start with the story of my partner and I. We were a romantic couple before 2005, but even though we wanted to get married, we couldn't because it wasn't legal. When marriage equality became legal across Canada and even in Alberta, the last province to allow it, we booked the Dean House on Calgary's Bow River as our wedding venue. On the day, Suzette dressed up like a goth drag queen with a Klingon princess updo, and I wore a frilly pink tuxedo shirt, black tuxedo jacket, and black sailor pants. We exchanged rings and declared our love in the presence of friends, family, and a representative from the province of Alberta. We celebrated with much happy crying. If you look closely at that picture there, you can see there's a trace of a tear on my face in that photo. We were legal and our relationship was protected by the laws of the land. Now let's consider another story with no happy ending. In 2004, a boy, let's call him Patrick, dies by suicide because of relentless homophobic bullying at the Calgary Catholic High School where I was teaching English. The day I learned of his death, I came home, hands shaking, and asked Suzette if she would support me in quitting my job and going back to university. I wanted to go to graduate school and study homophobia in Canadian Catholic schools. The problem I felt had caused Patrick to die by suicide. Both of our lives were dramatically changed by Patrick's death. My graduate work looked for causes behind the sad statistic confirmed by the Canadian Mental Health Association that LGBTI youth are at a high risk for suicide. Patrick had been a promising drama student at his school. He had sought help from the school counselors and administration, but found none. When Suzette, a novelist, read my master's thesis, she asked, "Can I turn your life into a novel?" She wrote Monoceros, pictured here, a novel in which a gay youth named Patrick Fury dies by suicide after being unremittently bullied in his Calgary Catholic high school. Pure fiction, based on pure fact. My master's thesis was also published as a book under the title That's So Gay, Homophobia in Canadian Catholic Schools. Later, when I was hired as an assistant professor at the Werklund School of Education, a frequent reaction to my research topic was a shrug. Homophobia in Catholic schools? What else would you expect? Well, something better than Patrick's fate. Though Monoceros was positively reviewed all over Canada and won literary awards, people would often say to Suzette, "That couldn't happen nowadays, right?" Wrong. Through my years of formal research projects, I have come to understand that this background of ours is a lot more than just our story. It is part of the evolution of LGBTI rights in Canada. In Alberta, there has been a long educational, legislative, and social struggle over gay-straight alliances in schools. Because of Patrick's death and the books Suzette and I have written in response to his tragedy, we have naturally been involved in that struggle. The question we ask ourselves is whether a gay-straight alliance, a GSA, in Patrick's school could have swayed things for him, could have permitted him to live on. But what is a GSA, and how might it have helped Patrick? Originating in the United States, GSAs are in-school student clubs that focus on making schools safe spaces for LGBTI students and their straight friends. Scholarly studies have shown GSAs to be success stories contributing to whole school wellness with positive effects on the broader community. Of particular note is a 2014 University of British Columbia study headed by Elizabeth Sewick that compared GSAs to school-based anti-homophobia policies. It found that GSAs are more successful than school policies in creating a welcoming atmosphere for LGBTI students. Just ask Lee Iskander, who struggled for a bona fide GSA at St. Joseph's Secondary School in Mississauga, hit international headlines. It all started when Iskander and their friends wanted to have their own LGBT club, they called it. They had never heard of GSAs. School administrators told them no, in no uncertain terms. Unfazed, Iskander's unauthorized GSA group brought rainbow signs and posters to school, only to be told that they couldn't put them up because, as Iskander recounted in an interview with Extra, quote, "They said rainbows are associated with LGBTI pride," end quote. In spite of the school's ban, the students managed to secretly unfurl their rainbows by baking dyed batter into cupcakes they sold for 50 cents a piece, raising approximately $200 for charity. Their campaign went viral. Unrelenting international, national, and provincial pressure resulted in Ontario's Bill 13, the Accepting Schools Act, which mandated that all Ontario schools, including faith-based schools, must allow students to establish gay-straight alliance support groups. Bill 13 includes a notable provision that requires schools to allow students to use the word gay in the name of their GSA. This provision was necessary because of Ontario Catholic education leaders' resistance to GSAs, and especially use of the word gay and celebratory symbols such as the rainbow pride flag. This is what I was alluding to earlier when I said bona fide GSA. Ontario Catholic education leaders reluctantly agreed to GSAs after pressure from Catholic students, Canadian human rights and civil liberties groups, the media, and the general public. But Catholic leaders proposed what Mark of Montreal's blog Slap Upside the Head called decoy GSAs, that is, watered down Catholic versions of GSAs, referred to by various innocuous names such as by your side spaces, with SIDE being an acronym for safety, inclusivity, diversity, and equity. Gender and sexual diversity in Canadian Catholic schools pose challenging conundrums. Using Catholic doctrine to discriminate against LGBTI students in Catholic schools violates the equality rights provision of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This kind of heterosexist discrimination is incongruous in a country such as Canada that is considered one of the most socially progressive countries in the world, due in large part to its charter. Increasingly, queer students in Catholic schools across Canada are becoming more aware of their charter rights, and several are fighting back. I want to share with you tonight just 3 vivid examples of resistance from my most recent book, Homophobia in the Hallways, Heterosexism and Transphobia in Canadian Catholic Schools. And if there are any youth visiting with us tonight, I would like you to pay close attention to these stories, because I'd like you to think about ways that you might be able to resist the heterosexism that may be operating in your schools as well, because resistance is possible. So what I'm going to share with you right now is Esther's story. Growing up in a small town in northern Alberta, Esther attended 2 Catholic schools, one from kindergarten to grade 8, and the other until she graduated. She got called dyke and faggot constantly from grade 9 to grade 11. It's not that Esther didn't try to get help about the bullying. Shortly after arriving at the high school, she told the vice principal that some girls kept calling her a dyke. He told her he would speak to the people involved, but Esther doesn't know if he ever did because nothing ever changed. The final straw for Esther came in grade 11 in an incident on the school bus during which she endured some terrible homophobic bullying. The driver did nothing to stop the bullying and actually blamed Esther and her friend for their own victimization. Esther reported the driver's actions to the bus company and then the school. Esther was referred to the school counselor, who wasn't sure how to handle the problem, and called upon the town's human rights coordinator for guidance. As an outsider, the human rights coordinator was not steeped in the Catholic school ethos. She made suggestions to the school counselor that no one in the school system would ever dream of doing. The human rights coordinator determined that the school climate was systemically homophobic, and if the school administrators were not going to actively make the school a safe place for LGBTI students, then one more subtle way to increase these vulnerable youth's perception of safety would be to purchase LGBTI affirming books for the school library. So this was a huge victory for Esther. And now I'd like to share with you Abigail's story. Growing up in a Catholic family in Northern Ontario, Abigail attended Catholic schools from kindergarten until she graduated. Apart from the guidance counselor, whom Abigail suspected was a secret, closeted lesbian, Abigail did not know of any other LGBTI people in her school. She went online and learned about gay-straight alliances, but she was warned about trying to set up one in her Catholic school. Abigail started a club called Equality Awareness that respected diversity and countered discriminations of all kinds: sexism, racism, classism, ableism, heterosexism, and was able to observe a toned-down Catholic version of the Day of Silence. Through the Equality Awareness Club, Abigail was able to organize a benefit concert at the school and then gave the proceeds to the local AIDS committee. Abigail's last act of resistance was in the final semester of her graduating year. In her grade 12 English class, students had to pick one classic novel, complete an independent study on it, and present it to the class. Abigail chose Virginia Woolf's novel, Mrs. Dalloway, and emphasized all the references to homosexuality in it. She was surprised that the teacher didn't shut her presentation down. And now I'd like to share with you Hannah's story. Born into a tight-knit Catholic community in Southern Ontario, Hannah went to Catholic schools from kindergarten until she felt compelled to drop out of high school after grade 11, when her mom kicked her out of her family home once the school informed her that her daughter was gay. Before she dropped out, Hannah made the surprising discovery that there was another lesbian in the school whom we'll call Jane, with whom she became fast friends. Hannah signed up for an option with Jane and worked together with her on one of the assignments for the option class, which was about reporting on a local community association. Hannah and Jane chose to feature the local LGBTI community. While working in the school's computer lab, the 2 girls discovered that all the websites affirming sexual minority groups were blocked. while opposing websites such as those of various Christian reform groups with messages such as homosexuals should burn in hell were fully accessible. Jane and Hannah brought this to the attention of their option teacher, who referred the matter to the school administration, who referred it on to the computer support personnel, who then started to block and unblock certain sites from the school system. Hannah doesn't know if it was just a temporary fix so they could work on their project or if the changes are still in place, but she and Jane felt, quote, triumphant, like Rocky. We were like, yes, yes, projects, queers are good, end quote. Contrary to what some conservative Catholic education leaders would have you believe, LGBTI students in Catholic schools are not mentally ill, passive victims in need of special Catholic pastoral care, but are instead important activists who are leading the revolution against homophobic oppression rooted in discriminatory religious beliefs. A key takeaway is that anti-homophobia education efforts should not overlook potential student leaders in Catholic schools. So I also researched the experiences of LGBTI teachers in Catholic schools. Resistance to religiously inspired homophobia and transphobia is less pronounced amongst teachers than it is among students. I'm sure you can imagine why that might be. Take, for example, the following story. In December 2018, Barb Hamilton, a teacher with Calgary Catholic School District, abbreviated to CCSD, went public about her decision to file 2 human rights complaints after she was pushed out, those are her words, of her job as the principal of a Catholic school because of issues surrounding sexual orientation, including the fact that she has a female life partner. Hamilton said that an environment of don't ask, don't tell, engendered a sense of fear amongst staff. While serving as a principal, Hamilton encountered 10 students who variously identified as LGBTI, who were engaging in acts of self-harm such as cutting and attempts at suicide because of the homophobia and transphobia that they had endured both at school and at home. I had kids literally bleeding in my office, Hamilton recalls. She sought help from senior leadership within the CCSD, but instead was forced out of her principalship. Hamilton's case became part of a discussion about the fairness of religious discrimination in a country that is respected the world over for its Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Canada is not alone in grappling with the problem of how to ensure basic human rights are upheld in publicly funded religious institutions. Conflicts between secular law and Catholic canonical law in Catholic schools are occurring with growing frequency in Commonwealth nations. For example, the Catholic Church sought an exemption from Australia's Anti-Discrimination Act so that it could exclude students from enrolling in Tasmanian Catholic schools on the basis of their faith beliefs or behavior deemed contrary to Catholicity. Australia's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner expressed concern about this exemption because it implied that a student may be excluded for other discriminatory reasons, such as being gay or transgender. If this kind of religiously inspired heterosexism in Catholic schools is to be reduced, then it is important to ascertain how widespread this problem is on a global scale. My current international comparative study is a critical discourse and narrative analysis of laws, policy, and curriculum documents, media accounts, and interviews with LGBTI students and teachers describing incidents of homophobia or transphobia occurring in Catholic school systems in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. I selected these countries because they share a framework of common values and goals, including the promotion of democracy, education, human rights, good governance, and individual liberty. In each of these nations, up to 70% of funding in support of Catholic schools comes from taxes. My overarching research question is, how does power operate within and across Catholic schools? This study extends beyond the borders of Canada into a global discourse of resistance to heterosexist oppression. It uncovers the broader implications for religious freedom, such as whether limits may be necessary in cases where the expression of particular religious beliefs calls for the suppression of human rights. Now I'd like to turn my attention to an exciting new research partnership committed to ensuring Canadian refugee settlement organizations are better prepared to support LGBTI refugees to not only survive, but thrive. I think we can all agree that we're having a tumultuous 2020. There's a pandemic still raging, waves of social change swelling around the world, and unfortunately, a rise in anti-LGBTI hate crimes globally. Take as an example the story of LGBTI activist Sarah Khagazi, who simply raised a rainbow flag at a Mushra Leila concert of alternative Arabic music in Cairo. Shortly after, she was arrested, imprisoned, and tortured by Egyptian authorities. She successfully sought asylum in Canada, but could not overcome the trauma of continuing to endure hate speech and persecution, even while safely in Canada. On June 13th, 2020, halfway through Pride Month, Hagazi was found dead in her Toronto apartment. She had apparently died by suicide. Her life and death represent the struggles faced by LGBTI people who are forced to hide their sexual orientation and/or gender identity in order to survive in more than 70 countries around the world. In collaboration with Calgary Centre for Newcomers, Dr. Ghada El-Atrash, and potentially other scholars like Kaori Wada, pictured here, of Werklund School's counseling psychology, we're hoping to build stronger supports for LGBTI refugees. Our specific goal is to nudge refugee settlement leaders to view and assess their organizational systemic barriers from an intersectional lens in order to address LGBTI issues in a more fulsome way. Ghada El-Atrash and I teach about intersectionality, and together we're hoping to underscore how aspects of a refugee's social and political identities, for example, race, class, sex, gender, sexuality, religion, disability, etc., can combine to create unique forms of discrimination and/or privilege. In applying intersectionality to various social institutional practices, we can better examine how they might be perpetuating social inequality. Kaori Wada has expressed an interest in expanding service learning for counseling psychology graduate students to include working with LGBTI refugees associated with the Center for Newcomers. Boban Stojanovic, manager of LGBTI programming at the Center for Newcomers, welcomes this kind of scholarly and professional support. In collaboration with Calgary's End of the Rainbow Foundation, Stojanovic helped develop the Center for Newcomers LGBTI program about 3 years ago, and they have already assisted more than 500 clients. But he sees systemic gaps that leave many LGBTI refugees without the assistance they need. Most of his clients come from countries where being LGBTI is criminalized. They are fleeing punishments ranging from a death sentence or imprisonment to torture or social exclusion. Many have faced death threats and arrive in Calgary with a great deal of trauma, requiring significant mental health supports. He describes the LGBTI refugee experience as complex, intersectional, and so far from the mainstream Canadian LGBTI experience. This community-based collaboration with the Center for Newcomers is key to both influencing policy and informing practice. We hope to improve procedures and outline success criteria for settlement practitioners, helping create safer and more sensitive spaces for LGBTI newcomers. We anticipate one outcome could be a train the trainer model for LGBTI sensitivity education, disseminated to various refugee settlement services. LGBTI asylum seekers all over the world see Canada as a safe haven, and for good reason. Now, we have to make sure that Canadian refugee settlement services adequately support LGBTI refugees once they arrive in Canada. This interdisciplinary collaborative research has the potential to save lives. Thank you so much for listening to my research lecture this evening. I really appreciate your interest in it and for coming. And if you or anyone that you know needs help, please take a look at these wonderful resources here. The Center for Newcomers LGBTQ Settlement Support. You can Google it, that URL right there. Canada Suicide Prevention Services, you can call them right there and text them. You can chat right now with someone from the Distress Center. If you'd like to talk to me about anything you heard this evening, you can reach me easily by email or via Twitter, or you can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or academia.edu. Thank you so much.
Tonya, thank you. Again, you are indeed an inspiring human being and an example for all of us to follow. Thank you for addressing this important and pressing issues, not only globally, as you say, but also in our Canada that is respected for its Charter of Rights and Freedom. Thank you for the true, very moving stories and for the lived experiences of the LGBTQ2+ communities. And thank you for speaking a much needed language of hope and possibilities and for assisting on this. Thank you. I will stop here. I can say a lot more, but I will stop here and I will invite all our attendees to please feel free to send me questions here. I will try to get to as many as possible. I will first mention, Tonya, Megan wrote, I just want to say this presentation is both powerful and motivating. Thank you.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm sure many will agree to this.
Thank you, Megan.
Let's start with our first question here. So the question is, what is your view on the Pope's recent public comments in support of same-sex unions? Shouldn't this be viewed as a sign for good things to come?
Oh, absolutely. Yay, Pope, love it. There was great hope with the new Pope when the Pope came into power. But those of us who are watchers of the Vatican have seen quite a lot of, let's say, to and froing. I mean, it's anyone who leads anything knows how difficult it is. I mean, just look at the United States where we have people on the left and the right. And once you get into power, it's very hard to please people. And there's a huge conservative faction at the Vatican who was not happy with some of the more welcoming things that Pope Francis said at the beginning. Like he said, who am I to judge, for example? And people took that as a very beautiful opening. And it's wonderful. But it wasn't followed up with a lot of change, There was not a lot of change in the legislation and the sort of doctrine, if you will, from the Vatican. But saying this is fascinating. It's wonderful that he said this. And let's follow it up now with some actual policy, So let's see this in writing.
Thank you, Tonya.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Our next question comes from Aubrey Hansen. The question is, given the often difficult nature of your research, what in your work gives you the most hope?
Thanks for that question, Aubrey. I'm sure you've had this problem yourself in your research. Really the youth, as I've been saying in why I wanted to focus on those 3 stories, and there are other stories like that, is that the youth really are leading the revolution against religiously inspired homophobia and transphobia in Catholic schools and other faith-based settings. And young people, they just bring me so much hope. Like they just haven't got that jadedness, right? That people get as they get older. As we get older, we think like, what can I really do? Well, we all know that it only takes one person to change the world, So the young people haven't got that just yet. And so they have a lot of hope, they have a lot of energy, and they will take on big battles, big ones, and they will win. So I see great hope in that. And sometimes when I'm having a hard day or things, I get sometimes some pretty awful messages like death threats and what have you. I just think about, why I'm doing this work, right? Why am I here? And so I always think back to young people, to try to create a safe space for young people in schools. Catholic schools in particular is what I'm working on. But so I just have to think about any of those youth that I've come across, either at Camp Firefly or in my research, people that I've interviewed, or in my own students that I used to teach when I was a high school English teacher. They bring me great hope for the future. But of course, we can't just leave it up to the young people to just say, oh yeah, kids will take care of it. Kids are all right. They'll take care of it for us. We all have to care about these matters. And so we need to support our youth in what they're doing. And so there's so many ways adults can do that in school settings, like check who's on your committees. How many youth are on your committees? What youth are on there? Have you invited marginalized youth or youth from different diverse communities to be members of that community? So that's just one obvious example that ways that adults can support youth, but the youth are the ones that are leading the revolution, and they bring me great hope.
That's so beautifully said. I completely agree, and this resonates very deeply with me. It is in these classrooms that I feel like it's the most fertile spaces, most fertile minds, and where there is most hope for me as well. So thank you for that. And thank you for giving us these tools as well to include the youth in our conversations, to bring them to participate. I think this is key.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a tool that I think we all will appreciate here as pedagogues, or as, any in any disciplines within the community. So thank you for that. I will continue to invite the audience to please pose some questions for Dr. Callaghan, but I have here another question from Aubrey. No, I did read Aubrey, sorry.
Yeah.
Mary Kate. So Mary Kate asks, what role have teachers played in supporting LGBTQI students? Do you have any advice for teachers in Catholic systems?
Oh, such a great question, Mary Kate, and thank you so much for that. Yes, I have a friend listening, Joanne, over in Ottawa right now, who I was working with, and she stuck her neck out like nothing else. She doesn't even identify as LGBTI herself, but she does identify as an ally to the community. And so at a time when it was a very fractious time at that school where we were teaching, she put up a safe space sticker on her door, and she was told to take it down. And she said, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And then they sent the custodial staff to remove it. So she, like on the off hours when she wasn't there. So she showed up one day and saw that there, and she's like, what's going on? Why have you taken down my safe space sticker? I'm just trying to create a safe space for the LGBTQ youth that don't find a safe space here at this school. And interesting, she was further hounded by the administration about that. They're saying like, you can't do that. So she continued to try to provide a safe space for them, like by offering her room as a space for them to have lunch, so they wouldn't have things thrown at them and so on at the cafeteria. Even that she was told not to do, but still she fought. She said, no, I'm here, like I'm a human being. I want to help these people. It's clear they need help. I'm a teacher. I'm going to provide my room. So unfortunately, she ended up not getting her contract renewed. So that was the person who really stuck her neck out and did suffer the consequences for that. So there are many, many teachers. So when I talk about the work that I do, really the documents and everything that I'm reading, they're like the organization, if you will, of the Catholic school. But as we know from Foucault, like there's the microphysics of power, right? So there's the beautiful power that's bubbling up from the bottom, people who are doing whatever they can with whatever tools they have in front of them to create safe spaces for LGBTI youth. For some, that's putting themselves at risk. As we saw, unfortunately, Barb Hamilton lost her leadership position because of the sticking her neck out in different ways, right? So, when you do this as an adult in the school, that's why teachers are less able to lead the revolution, if you will, than students, because they have so much more to lose. I mean, this is their career. They spent years getting this degree, and some of them advanced degrees, graduate degrees. So to put that on the line and their livelihood on the line, it's a big thing. It's a big thing to ask. So some people do it in very subtle ways in the classroom. For example, if you're teaching in a Catholic school, you might have to be talking about sex ed. You might be asked to teach that. And then you'd have to take Catholic training on how to teach that, which is of course not very open. But some teachers might, present both sides of the story. And even doing that is a risk that they might incur some discipline from higher ups, powers that be, that might come down on them. But basically, if you are a counselor in a school, remember your Hippocratic oath, right? Why in a Catholic school, if you're a counselor there, remember, why are you there? You're there to help the children. So if you know of supports that are within your system, your city, and you can help those LGBTQ students who are in front of you in your classroom or in your counseling session, offer those supports, even though you may have been told otherwise to not do that. Maybe your Catholic education leaders have said to you, you know what, we don't want you telling students about the Center for Sexuality. You know what, go ahead and do that. Take that risk, because you do have that Hippocratic oath. And there's a little child in front of you, a 12-year-old in front of you. You know, what are you going to do? You're going to have to help that little child, right? So there are people who take these risks on a daily basis, minute by minute, sometimes in schools. So there are all kinds of beautiful examples of resistance from teachers as well.
Thank you, Tonya.
No, you're welcome.
Such language of hope and possibilities. I remember my children attend Catholic schools here in Calgary, and I remember once I visited for a parent-teacher meeting, and one of our favorite teachers, I won't mention his name in case he doesn't want me to, but he was so happy on cloud nine, as if he'd won the lottery, and I said, "What's happening?" And he said, "The GSA has been now approved in Benson's High School." Yes, so it's yes, there is hope and change and transformation is taking place. I see Dr. Darren Lund here joining us. Hello, Darren. It's nice to see your name, and he has a question for you, Tonya. He says, Tonya, you talked about the risks faced by the young activists you have researched. Could you talk about some of the risks you, capital U, have faced in your own social justice research?
Well, Darren, thank you for that question. And I think that's probably coming from the heart, because you yourself have faced a number of risks for the very daring work that you do as well. And it is risky. And I have brought this to the attention of many leaders in the post-secondary environment, that, you know, when you have activist scholars, like, you invite them, you know, you want them to come to your institution, you need to support those people, right? They need to be supported. We need to anticipate that they're going to experience death threats or other vitriol in, you know, email, voicemail. Voicemail is very difficult to unhear those kinds of statements that you sometimes get. And so I personally have experienced those things. I have to do everything I possibly can to take care of my mental health and well-being. I've been through counseling. I love counselors. Yay, counselors out there. So take care of yourself. And also those leaders of the institutions, you know, you attract the activist scholar, you need to support the activist scholar, and ensuring that we are able to continue to do this very difficult work. It's not everyday ordinary research. I mean, I love all forms of research. Research is a beautiful thing, but some research is really risky to the person that is conducting the research, and that person needs to be supported in so many different ways. But, you know, it's hard for sometimes to convince people of that.
Thank you, Tonya, and thank you, Darren, for that. I'm looking at the time here. I'm mindful of the time, so maybe we can have 2 questions and see where that stands. There's so many questions for you, Tonya, and I encourage all the attendees to please take Dr. Callaghan up on her invitation and send her those questions by email. And when I ask a question to Dr. Callaghan, she really does pour her heart out, and it will be a very long, detailed email that will answer your questions. So I'm sorry we cannot get to all the questions, but let's try for 2 more and see where we're at. So Marie-Andre asks, thank you very much for a very good and inspiring talk. My question is, do you know what is the situation in the non-Catholic schools in Alberta? Can you talk a little bit about it?
Okay, so non-Catholic schools. So I'm not sure if she means non-Catholic faith-based schools or non-Catholic secular schools. Basically, I can tell you that they are also homophobic and transphobic. I'm not zeroing in only on the Catholic school. That just is the place where I have a lot of experience, and so that's one of the reasons I focus on it. There's so many other reasons I focus on Catholic schools having to do with Canada's history, but there are Jewish schools, Muslim schools, other faith-based schools, of course, in Calgary here. And other, you know, across Canada, all over the world, right? We have these schools. We also have what we call public secular schools, which are ostensibly not following any sort of any kind of faith, but it really depends on who's leading those schools. So those public secular schools, they may be led by somebody who has really profound faith beliefs, that may have issues with LGBTI, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex individuals. And that's not just to say that only religious people have those problems. We all are raised in a homophobic and transphobic culture. So we are all absorbing that and breathing that in. So it's part of every one of our institutions, whether they're schools, hospitals, justice system, everything. So those schools do have, problems with homophobia and transphobia as well. But they just have a little bit less problems if you're talking about the public secular, less problems with setting up a GSA, for example, less issue associated with that, less problems with students wanting to celebrate the Day of Silence, which is where students come to school and they don't say a thing all day long. They sit there quietly and they're trying to commemorate the violence and that has been visited upon LGBTI people. So they refuse to speak all day long for the day. So they can sometimes hand out a little piece of paper to the teacher to explain what they're doing, but otherwise, sometimes they just don't say anything. So in public secular schools, those kinds of things are allowed a lot more freely. But oftentimes it really comes down to who's running that school, like who's the principal of that school.
Thank you, Tonya.
You're welcome.
I see two questions here that speak the same thought, and I always find these kind of questions very useful. And the question is, what are your favorite LGBTQ2+ authors, or what is your favorite text to bring into a high school English classroom? That was by Christopher, and Samantha asked almost the same question. Can you give us some textbooks here?
Oh, okay, textbooks. Well, I am married to a novelist, so my favorite author is Suzette Meyer. My favorite book, LGBT, is Monoceros, which I referred to in the presentation. Monoceros sounds like rhinoceros, but it's monoceros meaning unicorn. It's the Latin word. Yeah, it's a great book because it's not really for children, but young people do read it because it's basically what I just talked about with Catholic schools in terms of what young people are faced with in Catholic schools, and it's done in such a humorous way. It's a serious topic. It does open with a suicide, just like I addressed suicide this evening. But Suzette Meyer finds some wonderful ways to infuse humor in there and magic realism and other things. So that's a great novel. Another great author is Vivek Shraya. She's right here in Calgary at the University of Calgary. So I recommend her work as well. I got a number of her work on my bookshelf behind me here. So many authors, you can, there are many, if you have, I don't know if there's young people who pose those questions, but if you can simply ask your teacher, they will lead you to some great works, contemporary works that were just published recently by LGBTQ authors. You can ask your librarian, love the librarians. I'm so glad they're open during the pandemic, and you can ask them for references. You could also do your own Google search, but you might as well ask the professionals, right, to give you the guidance. But I gave you 2 names there. There are so many others. I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you, Tonya. Let's see if we can answer here one other question in about 2.5, 3 minutes. There's so many more. Again, please, everyone, I apologize for not addressing all your questions. Please feel free to send the questions to Dr. Callaghan. Let's see here. The next on the list is our friend Betty Rice. She says, hi, Tonya, great presentation. It may be a bit early in your research, but are you seeing parallels with the situations in other countries you're observing besides Canada? Any big differences you're seeing?
Great question, Betty. Nice to hear from you. Thanks for coming. Unfortunately, no, there's not that many big differences. And the reason I find this, or the reason that I believe that is because Catholic schools find their direction from the Vatican in Rome. Okay, so they get their direction from the whole hierarchy of the church. So right down from the Pope to the archbishops, the bishops, and those people give guidance to Catholic schools. So you're going to find similarities in Catholic schools around the world. And I know, Khada, you're sending your children to Catholic schools. I love Catholic schools. I don't want you to give the impression that I don't like them. These are great schools. People want to send their children there for very good reason. Catholic schools, respect discipline, order, and academic rigor. These are what they're known for. But when it comes to respect for gender and sexual diversity, they don't usually get a passing grade for that one. So what I have been finding in these different, especially in Australia, is that what's happening to young people, LGBTI youth or teachers, is very, very similar. The one thing that's different is that in Canada, people here will take their story to the media. Like they will say this is not acceptable, either because they know the charter rights or because they've heard of them or they have an inkling of what their rights are. But they basically say like, no, this is not right. I'm not going to put up with this. And so if they're being fired, if it's a teacher being fired, she may take her case to the media, which we have witnessed with Barb Hamilton. The reason I can use her name is because she did take it to the media. And this is why the media is so important. I love media personnel as well. They carry that. Oftentimes it's a very short story, but it's a story that really is poignant. It's important. It's a story that people start talking about as they break bread around the dinner table. They might say, what just happened? What did I hear on the news? And then people can start saying, well, no, this is not compatible with Canadian values and Canadian law. So so that's one of the things I'm seeing as different, is that Canadians will take it to the press. But I'm looking at the time too, so I know that Ghada has other things that she wants to say here. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Tonya. Thank you so much for this important conversation. Thank you for being who you are in our world. We need a lot more Tonyas in our world. Thank you very much. Before, in closing, I would like just to talk about a few things here. But hopefully, I'm very sorry yet again to not be able to address all the questions that everyone had. Please feel free to contact Dr. Callaghan. But I do want to mention just a couple of things before we wrap up for the evening. I do want to speak to our Advancing Health and Just Schools and Communities program that is led by Dr. Tonya Callaghan. If anyone is interested in pursuing this graduate level program designed to assist educators, social workers, healthcare providers, and other community service workers in developing the knowledge, skills, and confidence necessary to develop and support healthy and socially just learning environments, please contact Dr. Callaghan by visiting the address that is displayed here on the slide. Lastly, should you be so moved by this work and wish to support our efforts, the Werklund School will be launching a crowdsourcing fundraising campaign later this month. So please stay tuned for future communications on how you can help create impact in our community with this work. And in the interim, if you wish to give a donation, please contact Cecilia De La Rocha at the email address provided also on this slide. Thank you once again, Tonya, for this very insightful, meaningful, and hopeful lecture. To all of those behind the screens this evening who made this event possible, thank you. To everyone who made the time to join us tonight, thank you for being here, for caring to make a difference. We wish you peace, and most importantly, we wish you health today. Here's to a more socially just world. Good night to those on this side of the globe, and good morning and afternoon to everyone elsewhere. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.